Ago, Mojuba. My name is B, and I'm a Latin American letter maker and researcher from Brazil. And I'm here today to share with you my process into designing a typeface for the first time. I feel very grateful for this opportunity to share the impact of this subject in my life and in my work. I'd like to thank the Type Awaken crew for this opportunity. There is a Bantu word from the African language Kikongo that means heart, but also memory. Tigana Santana taught me that heart and memory work together in knowledge by heart, and ingrained knowledge, latent all the time. We are always making ourselves forget these potencies, what is dear to us, dear to our hearts, what shapes us. Everything needs to be remembered. Nothing that I try to bring here is new. Everything has already been said. Everything has been forgotten. Knowledge is memory. I usually say that this project is an attempt because it begins in the immemorial time, long before me, it doesn't end with me. And it's also an attempt to redefine my relationship with letter forms, which are my main tool of creating narratives in my daily practice that have been with me for a long time now. By relating and experimenting words, I've realized that almost nothing remained from what I learned about writing. One of the first calligraphy lessons that I had told me in these bold and wobbly letters, verba volant, scripta manent. Disbelieving the power of the spoken word, of the oral technology, which happens with the presence and manifests itself in the exercise, as Pedro Silva taught me, says a lot about the society that grows and develops itself on the basis of contracts, which sustain a chain of exploratory movements, a legacy of the European traditions that were falsely established. One cannot trust what is only said, it must be written. Leda Maria Martins, a Brazilian researcher, in her precious and generous Performances da Oralitura, invites us to transpose the order of the reading memory to another environment, orality and ritual practices. Spiraling this vast epistemological spectrum of means of creation, passage, reproduction, and preservation of knowledge, I've been developing a project in line with my typographic study, in another attempt, to bifurcate the paths and leave behind what I no longer want to perpetuate. The project is about the Yoruba language, one of the 4 official written languages that use Latin characters in Nigeria. Yoruba is used by more than 20 million people in West African countries, such as Benin, Togo, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. On top of that is a cultural heritage in various parts of Latin America, where the diaspora was present, such as Cuba, Haiti, and Brazil. In Brazil, the country that most received enslaved Africans in the recent centuries, the Yoruba language is one of the main pillars for African cultural and ontological survival, presenting religious manifestations such as candomblé, umbanda, umolocó, and the cult of Ifá. In Cuba, the language mixes up with the Castelhano, deriving the lucumi, used in the Santeria, and is also present in Haiti, in the ritual practices of voodoo. And that's my connection to the language. The songs, the chants, the incantations and prayers for the Yoruba gods called Orishas. For a good part of my young adult life, I've lived with a person that was from Candomblé, and it was a terreiro by herself. So the language is part of my subjective construction, but it's not the first language that I learned to communicate with. As it is a pluricentric language, Yoruba has several standard versions, which may vary according to the place where it is spoken. And it's also a tonal language. Intonation is part of the semantic structure, that is, The same word can have different meanings depending on the tone that is used on the syllables. Important here to point out that the first record of a Yoruba translation with Latin characters dates from the 1800s and was made by a religious leader of the Anglican Church, Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther. And this brought me many doubts, since the books that I was able to access had mismatched information, and many of the Yoruba translations that arrived in Brazil was filled with text that corroborate with a racist view of the ancestors' knowledge of Terreiro. And one example of this misconception is that the Orisha Eshu is the representation of the Christian devil, the figuration of evil, the one that must be fought and avoided at all costs, whilst this is westernized dualistic perception of good and evil does not even exist in Yoruba cosmology. Ire, goodness and blessings, and Ibi, misfortune, inhabit the same space and are in constant motion to balance themselves. In this understanding, therefore, Eshu is timeless. It takes us out of this dichotomy. Eshu is the source of all possibility, generator of all movement, allowing us to communicate. Eshu has no beginning and had no end. Eshu makes the wrong turn into the right and the right turn into wrong. Unlike other African languages, which have their own scripts, there are no records of a Yoruba writing itself, as far as I could get with my research. However, I found some examples as present here by Saki Mafundikwa in his book, The Story of Writing in Africa. Aroko is a symbolic writing that uses threads, shells, and feathers to convey messages. Another source also presents Aroko as a tool for military use and war strategies. I also found this proposal made by an authority of Republic of Benin, Chief Toluache Oguntosin, a script for Yoruba that he called Oduduwa. In a brief survey on the website My Fonts, said to be the largest among digital font distributors, using the most relevant and most recent criteria, I came across an absurd, although not surprising, result that only 10% of the fonts with serifs contain the main characters of Yoruba. In sans serifs, this number drops to 7.5%. You may have noticed that 2.5% of sans serif fonts have all the main characters of Yoruba with diacritics. But as you can see here, the diacritics are inconsistent and often illegible. This is due, among other things, to the fact that Yoruba characters themselves are not covered by the Unicode Consortium. The diacritics are essential for the understanding of the language, and the ones that are available are borrowed from other languages, such as Vietnamese and the Romanized Indic. Important diacritics above and especially below the letters are wrong regarded as optional rather than essential for both reading and writing. The consequence of this is, for example, if you take the Articles 1 and 19 of the Declaration of Human Rights, which are articles that support the vision of freedom of expression, transmission of ideas, regardless of borders, because we are free and equal in dignity and rights, we have these gaps between the phrases, so it won't mean anything because we don't have the main characters. This is an example how it would be like in Portuguese and in English. So during my research, I found one website maintained by a Yoruba scholar called Musa Kon, and was there that I found the first chapter of the history of this project, which started in the 80s and was first named Pan-Nigerian. It came to me by the hands of Professor Dr. Victor Manfredi from the University of Boston, and it was developed while he taught University of Lagos in Nigeria. I remember being afraid to get in touch with Victor. I don't know why. It took me a while to message him. I managed to put it all together in an interpretations email that resulted in a 2-hour video chat between the two of us. He is a very kind and generous gentleman. So he told me the stories behind the project. And back then, the idea was to define and unify a character map for typewriters and also typesetting to accommodate the main indigenous language of Nigeria. In addition to Yoruba, we have Igbo and Hausa. But like many visionary projects of the time, the Pan-Nigeria project lost its official commitment and remained just a niche technology used by scholars of African languages, but not accessible to general public without specialized skills. Like many subjects that exceed hegemonic definitions, the effort to draw came too early, as an improvisation was a big part of adapting the idea to emerging technology, and too late, since the Nigerian-Congolese languages were already marginalized by global standards. In October 2020, I got a scholarship for a spot on the Principles of Typeface Design display type course taught by Juan Villanueva at Type Cooper. I decided to take this opportunity to design the first stage of the new foundation with a display version of it, which I named Oniresi. Oniresi is a word that don't belong to a language itself, but reminds me of the son of a Yoruba. I learned with Victor that with another spelling carrying the right diacritics, it has a meaning in Yoruba, which is shapeless or without form. From the first moment, my goal was to bring a critical view by approaching the original drawings with a different mindset and listening to the current communication needs of Yoruba users in the digital age. The beginning was very scary and full of crises. I thought about giving up several times, but every week I could see, with a little help from my friends and especially from Juan, the small advances that I was and still am shaping the letters and redefining my typographic eye, which was more used to the free forms of calligraphy. We went through the first year of the pandemic hand in hand, me, the letters, the will, the silence, and the process. Nothing happened by chance, and I'm certain that Oniresi was also made by other hands. And this is why, for me, this project is not a revival, it's an attempt. So far, I have been in contact with scholars of the language, both here in Brazil and people from Nigeria who grew up in Yoruba. Also, people from Terreiro and civilizing authorities from Terreiro, as another way to respect the ancestry present here. For some time, I wondered about the contradictory idea of crystallizing all the movements of this language into a rigid and often static support as typography. But one thing that I learned during this process, especially by reading and sharing the work of J. Mombassa, another Brazilian artist, which also makes sense in my condition as a dissident body, as I'm a non-binary person, is that to operate in the contradiction is a survival strategy. And to claim this space through this typeface, through this process, and through this whole thing is not to let myself be silenced, but not to be fully translated. So I thank those who came before me. I thank you today for your listen and attention. also like to thank Fernanda, who's behind the camera. And yeah, this is it. Thank you. A do pé.